for the male, we're going to imagine a male that's maybe 5'11", so just shy of 6 feet. So if you're 6 feet, you might be closer to the 7.5 to 8 head mark. So we're going to draw a head, okay, right at the halfway point, at the 7.5 point right here. Okay, we're going to start by drawing a circle, and you want to make sure that the entire head fits into this one of these sections. Okay, so you're going to draw the circle about 2/3 of the size of one of these. And when I draw a circle, it's really the sphere of the head on the skull. Okay, so I'm just drawing the top part, and then for the bottom, I'm going to draw a shield. So you can see on male faces, they're going to be a little bit more chiseled. If you look at the sternum, this is the sternum of the rib cage, you can kind of see that there's like an opening that starts about halfway on this egg shape, right? So if you want to put that in, I usually find like the halfway point, which is here, and then I might start it a little bit lower than the halfway point. But if you wanted to express the rib cage in more detail, you can draw an opening like that. So if you look at hips, and just hips in general, they are a very strange shape, right? So it's very hard to simplify this into a shape that's easy to draw. Make sure that the hips are not wider than the rib cage. Okay. The hips are generally approximately the size of the head, but I'm going to draw them as a tapered rectangle like this. So male hips taper this way, whereas female hips taper the opposite way. So this part's pretty important because if you look at a leg and if you look at how long each section of the leg is, you'll see that your calf here, or your lower leg, and your upper leg are exactly the same in length, right? So where you made that tick is where you should begin, and at the top of your foot is assuming where it should end. Find the middle point between here, and you're going to mark that, and that's where your knees are going to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little triangle shape, like an upside down nacho chip, okay? And that's going to represent the kneecap. So the kneecap is a cool little thing that floats on top of your leg, and it does its own thing. But once we know where the knees are, then we can start penciling in the legs. So if you guys are drawing two of anything, like if you're drawing legs or arms or anything that is side by side, I recommend you draw them together. Because you could see if I draw them together, I can see, oh, this leg is too skinny and this leg is a little wider. So that gives me the opportunity to fix it. But if I drew one and finish that one side and then I draw the other, then I have a lot more work to do. Notice where your arm goes when it's straight. Mine kind of goes to about 1/3 of my thigh when it's just kind of hanging out. You can see on Skelly here that if his arm is straight, it kind of goes, his hand kind of touches about 1/3 of the way on his upper leg. So this is a handy thing to remember. If you want, you can kind of draw the hand as like an oval shape. And your hand is typically the size of your face. Okay, so if you look at the size of my hand and the size of my face, you can kind of see it's my face minus the hairline. So you want to measure out, like if his hairline is up here, then his hand should be about that size. If you make somebody's hands too small or too big, it's going to start to look cartoony. So females have smaller rib cages than males do, right? A male, his rib cage might be 2 times the size of his head. So I can probably fit his head like twice in his rib cage. Whereas a female rib cages are about 1.5 times the volume of the head. Okay, so I say volume because if I filled the head with sand and then I pour that sand into the rib cage, it will fill that rib cage 1.5 times. Female hips are slightly wider than female rib cages, okay? Just like male hips are slightly more narrow or the same width as the rib cage. So Skelly is a male, okay? So if you look at Skelly, you can kind of see that the width of his hips and the width of his rib cage is wider than his hips. So if you were drawing a female, if Skelly was female, his hips would be wider than his rib cage. So we just want to make sure that if this is the width of your rib cage, then your hips are slightly wider. My shoulders move independently from my rib cage. So I can do this and my rib cage is not moving, right? My shoulders are moving independently from my rib cage. I just want you to compare your upper arm just on yourself, on your own bodies, okay? Compare the thickness, I guess, of your arm to the thickness of your leg, okay? And you're gonna see that the thickest part of your arm is still thinner than, I would say, your calf. So your ankle here, like this width here, might be suitable for your arm, but don't make your arms thicker than your legs, okay? Because then your figure is going to feel really strange. So you want to keep that in mind. Typically when you're drawing children, whether they're boys or girls, they're not going to have these square jaws, right? So typically children have slightly more subtle jaws. If I divided this section 5 into 4 equal parts, okay, the circle will probably be 3/4 and the jaw will be 1/4. Okay, whereas adult proportions is more like 2/3, 1/3. When you're drawing children, you can kind of draw their hips as just a box, okay? So neither tapered this way or tapered this way. So they're pretty similar, like boys and girls have pretty similar proportions. So I would make the hips slightly smaller than the head, okay? Remember how big the female hips were compared to the head? The little child is closer in proportion to male bodies in that the hips are pretty much smaller than the head. I know I haven't really talked about foot size in relationship to the rest of the body, but you just want to make sure that the width of your foot is wider than the width of your hand. Okay, so on my male figure here, like my foot is looking a little bit small, so I can adjust that. When you're drawing children, children typically have like smaller hands and feet than adults do. So you don't want to give children like really big feet or really big hands, because then they start to look like adult, maybe dwarves, kind of that type of proportion. So I can kind of measure it, figure out where halfway is. So if halfway is about there on my pencil, I can go ahead and make sure that the arm is the same length, okay, for both arms. If you don't do that, then it starts to look weird and one arm looks much bigger than the other. Again, if you're drawing children, I'm gonna lighten up this line here at the bottom. And remember, that's kind of where the nose goes, right? At the bottom of this circle. So if I'm drawing a child, I want to make sure that the line of the eyes is closer to the bottom than the middle. Okay, so I start from the middle and then I bring it down just a little bit. And then the ears sit between the eyes and the nose when a face is looking straight at you. So newborns are about 3 heads high. Their heads are so big that, and then their arms and legs are like not working yet, right? So they can't carry the weight of their body yet. Baby faces are not really pointy like this. They've got baby cheeks. And then the eyes on newborns are not like your regular eye proportions. They're like super short. If you're drawing babies, please don't give them dark eyebrows. Okay, like I would say maybe 0.1% of babies are born with like actual dark eyebrows, but just give them just like a tiny dot above their eyes, like that. If you make them any darker, they're gonna look even weirder. Babies are not represented well in figure drawing at all, and neither are older people. So it's a good opportunity to include them. Okay, so babies also don't have necks that are long like this because their heads are so big that they have like rolls in between their rib cage and their neck. So you don't really see their neck as much as you would on a child that's a little bit older. So I'm gonna start the rib cage and I'm gonna draw the rib cage pretty much in this next section here, but I'm gonna make the rib cage a little bit smaller than the head, okay, on purpose. So this baby is not really newborn. He's maybe like, I don't know, maybe a couple months old, because newborns would have even smaller hip and rib cage size. Older people generally tend to have longer faces than younger people. So I'm going to intentionally make her face longer than she would be when she was 30. By longer, I don't mean make the head bigger. I just mean make the head more narrow and slightly longer. Just because somebody's older doesn't mean that their skeleton changes at all. Their skeleton is still exactly the same. It's just that their spine is a little bit more curved, right? So if you look at the rib cage, where you put the rib cage on the younger version, okay, on the 30-year-old adult, we're gonna put the rib cage in the exact same spot on grandma. When you're drawing older people will start to lose some of these curves. They're gonna be a little bit rounder in the middle because as you age, you know, your skin gets a little looser. Things don't kind of hang out the way you want it to hang out, and typically older people generally are a little chubbier. Older people tend to have shoulders that are a little bit more droopy. Okay, so I'm going to draw her shoulders as like a curve. And then I'm going to draw my spacers. So my spacers are going to be a little bit lower. You can see here the spacers kind of line up with the top of the rib cage, Whereas on grandma here, they're lower, okay, much lower. Again, the older you are, the lower down your nipple line is going to be for male and females.